Welcome to Vinex Studio. Let's start making games. Hi and welcome to Basics of Unity Scripting Part 2. So in our Part 1 video, we have covered how to create a new script and add that script to your game object and how the basic functions, the start and the update functions work in Unity. So in this tutorial, we're going to see some of the other basic functions which most of the game developers in their beginning stage will be using. So those will be the vector3, transform, Mathf, and the input system. We'll be covering all these functions in detail in the other tutorials. So in this tutorial, we'll just go through what are these functions and how they can be used. So first, let's start with the vector3. Now vector3 is basically a three-dimensional vector which has three values, one for the x-axis, one for the y-axis, and one for the z-axis. Now it can store any value in this three-dimensional space, but basically we use vector3 for understanding position. Now a position of a game object in three-dimensional space is represented by magnitude in each axis. So for example, if you say object is at 301, that means it is at a distance of 3 in the x-axis, 0 in the y-axis, and 1 in the z-axis. Let's go ahead and add a game object to our scene. So we'll add a cube. So as you can see, the cube's position is basically x80, y15, and z0. So this position can be saved in a vector3. If you don't want to use a vector3, then you will have to use three floating type variables to save each of the axis values. Now we have a complete blog post on all the functions that vector3 can cover. So I'll leave the link in description. Please go through that. It will be really helpful for you if you want to understand vector3. Now next is the game object's transform. Any game object in the scene has a transform component to it. Even if you add an empty game object, it will have the transform component. Now transform is the most basic component of any game object. It defines where the object is in the game space and what is its rotation and what's its scale. Now all position, rotation and scale are all in 3 dimensions, but position is saved in vector3, rotation can be saved as quantinion, and scale can again be saved as vector3. You can just change the values from here and then decide on how you want the game object to be. The next function is Mathf. So any mathematical function that you want to do in Unity, you will have to use Mathf. Mathf has a lot of inbuilt functions, like if you want to get the absolute value, if you want to clamp the number of digits, or if you want to clamp the minimum and maximum values, then you can use Mathf. Mathf also has a lot of other functions. So depending on what your requirement is, you can use Mathf. So we'll not go into the depth of what each and every function does. So basically just keep in mind that if you want to do a mathematical function, you need Mathf. Now next is the Unity's input system. Unity has two types of input system, a legacy one and the new input system. The legacy input system is basically controller free. That means the same code can be used for all the controllers. And the new input system allows you to map only the controllers that you require, thereby saving the scan time. So for a beginner, it is not necessary to use the new input system, but it might be a little complicated for a new user to understand the new input system. So the old input system is very simple to use. You just have to type input dot and it has a lot of static functions. For example, if you want to get the arrow keys in the keyboard, you can just say input dot get axis horizontal. And the same code can be used if you're using a joystick. So that way the old input system takes care of no matter what device you connect to it, it will take the input from that. So hopefully this was a little bit clear to you. Now let's go to the code and see some examples. We'll add the code to our cube game object. So we'll just call it example and we'll say new script, create and add. Now let's open the script in Visual Studio for editing. Now all these basic functions that we spoke about are inside the Unity engine namespace. So we don't require using system.collection and using system.collection.gen. Now, first let's create a new vector3. So to create a new vector3, you have to say vector3, which is the data type, and then you have to give the name of the variable. So let's call it POS, and that will be equal to, so when I declaring a new vector3, you have to say new vector3, and then you can give the value to it. So let's say 10, 0, 5. Okay. Now, since transform is the very basic component of every game object, it can be referenced without getting the component. Other than transform, if you want to get any other component, for example, the cube has a box collider attached to it. So if you want to reference the box collider, then you need to get the component first. So before getting the component, you need to create a variable of that data type. So this is a collider. So we'll say collider and we'll call it call. So simply semicolon. So in the start function, you can just say call equal to get component box collider. So this is how you can reference all the other components in attached to the game object. But you don't need to do that in case of transform. Since transform is a very basic thing, you can just reference the transform using the name transform. Remember, it should be smaller t. The capital T is basically a data type. So if you want to declare a variable of type transform, then you have to use capital T. Transform object. So this will, oops, you can't say object, so we'll say transform obj. So this object will hold the data inside a transform. So this will hold all the data like position, rotation, and scale. So then you can extract the data from there. Now, since we already have a vector3, now we can assign a transform. So inside the transform, we have position. So you can just say dot. So you can see all the values. So you can do all these functions inside the transform. So now we are going to just use the vector3. So we'll just set the position. So you can see transform dot position. So that will be equal to our vector3. So this way you can use the vector3 and assign it to the transform position. Similarly, you can use a quaternion to assign the rotation of a transform. Now to understand the input system and the Mathf system, we'll try to increment the x position of our vector3 and assign it to the transform. And we'll try to limit that value using Mathf to maybe 12 in the upper direction. So what we have to do is position dot x is equal to input dot get access, and in brackets you just have to say horizontal. So if you press the left arrow key, it will return -1. If you press the right arrow key, it will return +1. So we are basically incrementing and decrementing it. And now what we're going to do is we are going to say position dot x. Okay, we have to say position dot x plus equal to, so that will increment it. Otherwise, it will set the value to 1. Dot x is equal to mathf dot clamp. Okay. Now you have to give the value, that is your position dot x, and then you have to say what is the minimum value and what is the maximum value. So it's going to be position dot x, and let's say the minimum value to be 8 and the maximum value to be 12. So it will not go above 8 and it will not, sorry, it will not go below 8 and it will not go above 12. and then we'll assign the transform dot definition is equal to uh, so what we are doing here is we are using the input function to get the horizontal axis value and adding that to our position's x coordinate, then using Mathf to clamp that value between 8 and 12 so that it doesn't go beyond these two ranges, and then we are assigning that position to a cube. So now let's go back to Unity. Oh, we don't need this transform object, we can just delete this. So once you go back to Unity, it will compile your script, and if you have any errors, it will be displayed in the console window. So we don't have any errors. So let's play the game. Now, since in the start function, we are setting the value to 10, 0, 5. So it has set that value. Now, if I use the arrow key, it is moving. But as you can see, it is getting limited to 8 and 12. So now these are the basic functions that you need to know to make your first game. I think with this you can make a pretty good game. So if you want us to cover any other functions for you, so leave them in the comment below. And we already have covered a lot of functions in our Unity tutorial series and in the Learn Unity from Scratch series. If you don't find any tutorial that you feel is required, please leave them in the comment below so that we can add that to our tutorial series. Thank you and see you in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share.